Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, I think we will get started. I know we will be coming in, trickling in, but for the full use of our time, I'm going to start us right on the hour as folks are still joining us. Come on in. Welcome to Wednesday Gatherings. My name is Kim Schultz. I'm the Director of Interreligious Engagement and Public Projects here at CTS, and I'm very excited about this workshop offering we have today for our Wednesday gathering. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, but before I do that, just a little bit of business. We have a chat. We ask you to please use the chat. Feel free to comment, ask questions. I will help our hosts look through the chat, but if you have reactions, thoughts to what you experience, what you hear today, we would love you to utilize the chat. The other thing I'm going to say, and this might be a little bit different from how we have sometimes do Wednesday gatherings, is if it is at all possible, if you could have your cameras on, it would be very helpful for our presenters today. There will be dialogue and discussion that is usually easier when we can actually see faces of who we're talking to. So if it is all possible for you to turn your camera on, I think it'd be much appreciated on our end. Before we get into the content of today's Wednesday gathering, we're going to start with a words of gathering, as we do every week, a moment to center and to hear from diverse voices and perspectives in a meaningful moment. And today we are very honored to have back MDiv student David Alderman, who's going to lead us in our words of gathering. So David, I'll pass it to you.
Good morning, friends. My name is David, and I am a child of God and a follower of Jesus. Today, I have written a poem for our words of gathering, partly inspired by approaching All Saints' Day, celebrated on November the 1st. If you are comfortable doing so, I invite you to reflect on your own journey or your seminary journey, and I invite you to think about how your life has changed along the way. In your life, if a loved one has made their transition since you began this journey, or if in any journey, you started the journey with someone and then you continued that journey after they had left this earth physically, I invite you to reflect on their life and their influence and inspiration for you. This poem is about my mother. I call it, She Was There and Now She Is Here. She was there with me when I began this journey. She is here with me, though having died to this life, been born into a heavenly balcony looking over me as I study. She is just as happy as the day I was accepted to seminary. She floats on that lake where her spirit can laugh and play. She floats on that lake where we once lived our whole lives in one day. She is here with me, and she's here with you. Who is she to you? Who is here with you as sure as they once were, there at the beginning? Who was with you when you began the journey and now gone? Who is with you? Who is with you? Who is neither here nor there, but somewhere, everywhere? Our love lives on, and our love still has so much to become. Our love does not forget, but our love remembers as everyone gathers, just on the other side of the veil, face to face, just as I held my forehead up to hers so we could imprint our souls on each other, saying goodbye to encode her essence upon mine, to outlast time and place. Her laughter echoes and her smile shows up. Her eyes still sparkle in the sun through the window and in the flickering on the surface of the puddle below. She sits beside me in excited anticipation as I review the story of Esther. She rises with Lazarus. With the hand of Jesus, she gets back up on the water with Peter. She draws in the sand again through the fingertips of her granddaughter, whose name is Thea. She reads the Bible again in my mind as I develop my theology. She is here with you through me. Who is here with us through you? Who is inspiring you from some other place? We remember their stories in our story, their ways in our way, and their spirits in our grace. As I remember how it felt to hear my mother pray, their story is yours now. Share it every day. Thank you.
David, thank you so much for giving us that moment together and allowing us to take your beautiful poem and reflect on it in our own stories and in our own ways with our own families and friends. It's beautiful, and imprint our soul. Thank you, David. We are very excited today to host a workshop that we are calling Thinking Polyculturally, and inviting our friends with Silk Road Cultural Center to lead us in this workshop today. Again, if you joined late, we are asking, if at all possible, if you can turn your cameras on. It will be, I think, an easier conversation with us all, if that is a possibility for you. CTS has had a long relationship with Silk Road Rising, now Silk Road Cultural Center, for a number of years, having lots of different incantations and formations of our friendship and our partnership with different events and lectures. And it's always an honor to work with Jamil Khoury, who has now introduced us to another wonderful person that I'm so excited to have in our circle here at CTS, and that is Dr. Tasneem Mandviwala, both of Silk Road Cultural Center's Polycultural Institute. And we have been exploring this opportunity to bring this pilot learning module to CTS, and came up with a first step here of offering this seminar facilitated by both Jamil and Tasneem to present this opportunity to explore the idea and the world of polyculturalism. I will also give credit, I'm not sure if he's on yet, to Professor Jose Morales, who has been an advisor on this project and has been acting as I believe, a faculty consultant as we share it with CTS. So there's a lot to say. I'm not going to bother saying it because we have people who are going to say it better. And I know we're going to be taking the full hour. So I'm going to let Tasneem and Jamil introduce themselves, take it away. And I just want to say one more thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this with us. And we're so happy to, once again, work with you, Jamil, and Silk Road Cultural Center. So I'll let you take it away.
Well, thank you so much for that, Kim. And I want to add that in addition to the work we've done with the CTS community, we have also worked with Kim Schultz as an artist, performer, playwright extraordinaire. So this is a relationship that has many different component pieces, and we are so proud of that. Once again, my name is Jamil Khoury. I am the co-executive artistic director of now Silk Road Cultural Center, formerly Silk Road Rising. My husband, Malik Galani, and I co-founded Silk Road in 2002, really as a response to the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, and the anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, and anti-South Asian backlash that immediately followed. Malik is originally from Pakistan, came here at the age of 8. My father was from Syria, which places us on that historic Silk Road. We are an interdisciplinary arts organization rooted in Pan-Asian, North African, and Muslim experiences. We are perhaps best known for our live theater productions, as well as our arts education programs in Chicago public schools, and our national advocacy to expand the American story. I am also, as Kim noted, the founder and director of Polycultural Institute, the Think and Create tank of Silk Road Cultural Center. We understand the Institute as functioning to generate art and ideas that promote polyculturalism. And one other little piece of information that I think is relevant to today's gathering is that I completed a master's in religious studies from the University of Chicago Divinity School back in 1992. So I was very much a part of that Hyde Park Seminary coalition. So I will now hand this to my colleague Tasneem.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tasneem Mandviwala. And before I dive into my own intro, David, I just want to thank you again for that poem. I'm still sitting with that line, lived our entire lives in one day. I was so deeply moved by that. So thank you again. So I'm a cultural and developmental psychologist at the Department of Comparative Human Development at the University of Chicago. My own work focuses on the identity development experiences of second-generation South Asian Muslim American girls and women. I'm currently a postdoctoral scholar at U Chicago, examining the well-being of adolescent boys of color in the US within their relationships with law enforcement officers. At Polycultural Institute, I'm the polycultural educator and work with Jamil to give workshops and lectures and hold events such as this one about polyculturalism. So as we dive in today, I wanted to outline some goals for us that we hope you can take away today. So one is somewhat simple and basic, but I think it's always a great idea to start with simple and basic, which is to learn the definition of polyculturalism, particularly within the context of culture and multiculturalism and how those terms are defined. And we'll be getting into that in just a moment. The second thing I'd like all of us to be aware of is imagining polyculturalism as applied to our daily lives. And so Jamil and I will be sharing experiences from our own lives where we found polyculturalism to be a useful lens to understand our own experiences through. And so we also invite all of you to, as we're going through the discussion, to sort of apply it, reflect on your own lives and experiences, and see where it might come in handy or useful, even retroactively. And then finally, we're going to end today's workshop with a few discussion questions. We're going to come together as a group and sort of reflect on all of the terms and ideas that we've presented to you. So as we start out, I wanted to take a moment to, again, set the quote unquote culture of this workshop. And again, we'll, as perhaps many of you are already aware, culture itself can be a complex term to grapple with, but it can be complex in a very beautiful, human, exciting way. So in terms of how we invite all of you to participate today, I'd like to read a short invitation. All of us present belong here. Everyone is welcome in this polycultural space. Everyone is bringing their own unique story, and your presence here lets us create a new world within this room for the next hour, or this virtual room, if you will. We understand each of us here carries within ourselves larger histories and experiences that are critical to how we understand ourselves as people and individuals, and that in the time we have together, we likely won't be able to fully address all these complexities. However, we hope to draw your attention toward the ways in which our understandings might overlap and our experiences might parallel each other's. You are invited to bring your whole self without shame or judgment, and we ask that you receive everyone else in this room with that same openness and acceptance. So with that, Jamil, I'll turn it over to you to walk us through the definition of culture for us. You're muted, Jamil.
So sorry. Thank you so much for that. Tasneem, culture does not have a singular universal definition. I think we are still grappling with how precisely to define or understand culture. We like to think of culture as referring to the collective accumulation of knowledge, beliefs, values, and behaviors that are associated with an identifiable group of people and inherited from generation to generation. And I think that idea of passing along culture is so important. Culture can also refer to community-specific ideas of what is true, good, beautiful, and efficient. And I think that we should always remember that culture is embodied, it is enacted, and that it shifts. It responds to new situations, new circumstances, and environments. All of us belong to any number of cultures at any given time, cultures and identity markers, and those also evolve, change, transform. We want to look at how cultures intersect and inform the individual that you are, the collective that we are, and the various collectives that, once again, we find ourselves a part of. And as we go through life, those also redefine themselves and evolve. And also to look at the relationship between time, sort of place, and culture formation. And, you know, I want to refer to David's beautiful poem and a relationship between a son and a mother, and how time and life and milestones impacted and shaped the culture of their family, of their relationship, of their community. So I will pass it back to Tasneem.
Yeah, thanks, Jamil. And also, in this question of time, I think is super pressing for us as individuals, as beings, as souls living in the 21st century because of social media and the increased technology that we're facing. We have, I think, a remarkably new we're having a remarkably new human experience in terms of how we're interacting with time and information and the culture that that information is shaping. So something else to kind of be aware of as we think through that term culture and how dynamic and alive it might be, but also how in flux it might be. So moving on to the definition of the term multiculturalism, this might be the term that many of us here present are already familiar with. It certainly gained popularity through sort of at the beginning of the 90s and throughout the 2000s and 2010s. And essentially, so Polycultural Institute defines multiculturalism as a worldview that promotes the understanding that distinct cultural communities must be afforded recognition and representation, often within institutionalized frameworks. So that includes the state, the corporation, the university, the arts organization. And multiculturalism has been an incredibly useful worldview and sort of framework, particularly in places like the US, where we do have an increasingly diverse population. And there have been incredible benefits over the past 50 years or so in terms of raising cultural awareness and making folks more aware of the diversity that we're living amongst every day. And also it's had wonderful sort of political and policymaking effects. So it's certainly been a really foundational sort of diversity worldview. On that note, I also do want to present Vijay Prasad's view on multiculturalism and how this particular scholar frames it. So Vijay Prasad is one of the scholars who's credited with coining the term polyculturalism, along with Robin G. Kelley. So in Prasad's 2001 book called Everybody Was Kung Fu Fighting, let me make sure I get the title correct, Afro-Asian Connections and the Myth of Cultural Purity. So if anyone's interested in that book, that's what that's called. Everybody Was Kung Fu Fighting, Afro-Asian Connections and the Myth of Cultural Purity. So in this book, Prasad says, quote, multiculturalism adopts an idea of culture wherein culture is bounded into authentic zones with pure histories that need to be accorded a grudging dignity by policies of diversity. And some of you might be picking up a certain tone in that definition that we can certainly dig into a little bit more. And then he also says, quote, multiculturalism is a principle for the regulation of social life from above, one that can only fitfully find itself in the sorts of struggles that produce the values of interaction from below. So on that note, I think we can turn into our definition of polyculturalism, Jamil.
Thank you. We often say at Silk Road that we were born of a multicultural politic. So it was essentially to create space for Asian, Middle Eastern, North African, Muslim voices on Chicago stages, on America stages, but that we quickly migrated to a polycultural aesthetic, and that will make sense in a moment. Polyculturalism, I like to think of as being in relationship to multiculturalism and sort of the 2.0. So to go with a working definition that makes a lot of sense for our work as cultural producers, as art makers, and as people who've really benefited from the multicultural idea of representation matters, how we think about representation, how we leverage representation, and taking that further. So polyculturalism is the theory that cultures continuously evolve and transform through dynamic interchange and human connectivity. I think the connectivity part is so important here. It assumes that cultures are fluid and flexible, not static and fixed, and that as cultures intersect with each other, they redefine themselves. Polyculturalism promotes the understanding that cultural communities and the multifaceted individuals that comprise them share challenges and needs that produce alliances and spur coalitional politics. So if multiculturalism is sometimes critiqued as being somehow divisive or reinforcing silos or a type of separation, polyculturalism is really what comes after that. And that is the connections, the relationships, the interchange that we are always looking to promote. And I should say what ideally comes after that. So Vijay Prashad would go back and say, polyculturalism is a provisional concept grounded in anti-racism rather than in diversity. And I think that's something for us to, really mull over. Unlike multiculturalism, polyculturalism assumes that people live coherent lives that are made up of a host of lineages. The task of the historian is not to carve out the lineages, but to make sense of how people live culturally dynamic lives. Polyculturalism is a ferocious engagement with the political world of culture, a painful embrace of the skin and all its contradictions. And I do believe there is something intentionally political about polycultural thinking, in that we are looking to shape perceptions, ideas, policies, so forth, without applying a sort of dogmatic stick or feeding people a policy or a politic. Ethnocentrism, xenophobia has been present throughout history, absolutely. But so has polyculturalism. And that desire, that curiosity, that interest in what is different about and between and within groups of humans, and how that difference is judged. Do we ascribe goodness or badness, rightness or wrongness? And that can result in either cultural rejection or a kind of incorporation, porosity, absorption. Historically, if we look at the relationship between the peoples of Asia and Africa, and obviously that's the focus of Prashad in Everyone Was Kung Fu Fighting, the xenophobia was not based on race, but rather on culture. So while there may have been a sense of superiority, and that could be flowing from any any direction. It was not necessarily the dehumanization that Eurocentric concepts of, well, actions of enslavement and a kind of forced capitalism later introduced, where race really determined one's place within a hierarchy of essentially haves and have-nots. And that, when we think about culture and race, it becomes very important for us to kind of dissect those terms as they've played out historically. What does it mean to use the word Chinese or Indian or Italian when we speak in our sort of broad American concepts of white or black or Asian or Latinate, and to, just further interrogate the meanings and associations and the feelings that those words, those terms can often evoke. An interesting example of polyculturalism was really the interplay between Islamic scholarship and particularly the translation of Greek philosophical, the legacy of the great philosophers from Greek into Arabic that allowed for further translations into European languages that later really, are credited as the catalyst for the European Renaissance. So had it not been for that work, that earlier work of Islamic scholars, much of what we think of with regards to the Renaissance and its artistic and philosophical and intellectual traditions can be traced to Islamic empires. And then on a very personal level, I think of my own familial heritage as being kind of innately, inherently polycultural. My father from Syria, my mother, the daughter of Polish and Slovak immigrants. So this interplay, this interchange between Arab culture and Slavic culture, which very much informed my upbringing, my socialization, and the fact that I'm married to a South Asian Ismaili Shia Muslim man of mixed Pakistani, Indian, and Iranian heritage. So all of that figures into my own, very immediate polycultural frame of reference. And I know Tasneem has a story to share as well, or actually many stories, but please.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, actually, I had really appreciated, which I'm sure most, if not all, present are already familiar with the document Interreligious Best Practices. Kim shared that with us beforehand, and I absolutely loved the specificity of religious identity that was invited in there, because that's certainly an experience that I won't say struggled with, but that I've had to navigate around in the US as a Muslim person, but a Muslim person who is from a very tiny sect of Shia Islam called Dawoodi Bohraz, and we're based in India. And so that's kind of the preface to my story. Way back in 7th grade, in the happy time of adolescence, where all of us are, of course, struggling to establish our identities and peer acceptance and all of that. My classmates knew that I was quote unquote Muslim, but they didn't know much else about me. And they also knew that our 7th grade science teacher, Mrs. Tuma, was from Syria and that she spoke Arabic. So my classmates did some cultural math in their own minds and said, oh, Mrs. Tuma speaks Arabic, you're Muslim, therefore you must speak Arabic. My 7th grade self didn't want to admit that I did not, in fact, speak fluent Arabic, because this was one of the rare moments where I was getting peer attention and I felt like everybody was focusing on me. What I actually speak is a dialect of Arabic mixed with Persian. Oh, I'm just seeing the comment pop up. great about the Bora Mosque. So I actually speak a dialect of Arabic mixed with Persian, equal parts Persian and Gujarati, which is an Indian language. So to a native Arabic speaker from Syria, the language I speak would make absolutely no sense, and vice versa, right? It wouldn't be comprehensible. And so I attempted to begin a conversation with Mrs. Tuma, and fortunately the bell rang, and I was literally saved by the bell in that instance. But thinking back, that experience itself, I did not have the language to explain to my classmates that, yes, I'm Muslim, but that, first of all, of course, doesn't mean that all Muslims speak Arabic, which can be, that misconception can be attributed to a number of things, media and a lack of education, and et cetera. But I myself, as an American student, as a child who was born in Houston and was trying to sort of establish my public identity within a non-Muslim space, I didn't have the language to really explain myself, to explain my identity, because I too was perhaps a little confused. Like, yes, I am Muslim. Yes, the Quran is in Arabic. Yes, I speak some language that is not English. And it's written in Arabic script, in fact. And so I can read Arabic. I just don't necessarily understand everything I'm reading. So polyculturalism would have been a really fabulous tool to have in my back pocket to kind of explain my heritage there and my lived reality. So on that note, I want to shift us a little bit into discussing a few of the social scientific studies that have been done on polyculturalism. It's a relatively new diversity worldview. And when I say relatively new, like past 20 odd years. And so there hasn't been too much research done on it, but the research that has been done by social scientists has been incredibly promising. So one study I want to direct us to is by Rosenthal and Levy, published in 2013. And I can, if anybody is interested in looking at these articles in full, please feel free to reach out to us, and I can send those to you, the full citation to you. So in this particular study, the researchers primed participants with 3 types of diversity approaches: polyculturalism, multiculturalism, and colorblindness. And I know we've discussed polyculturalism and multiculturalism. If folks aren't familiar with what colorblindness is, that's basically the view that your race or ethnicity doesn't make a difference in terms of how people interact with you and the opportunities you're afforded, essentially taking a colorblind approach to human diversity. So the researchers discovered that those individuals who were exposed to polycultural values rated outgroup members more positively and humanely compared to colorblindness and multiculturalism. Similarly, in 2018, Chow, Tadmore, and Morris, they implemented the same 3 diversity ideologies of colorblindness, multiculturalism, and polyculturalism. And in this case, they were exploring which ideology might contribute most to creativity. So the results, I'll read a quote from them. Quote, polyculturalism, the ethos of fostering intercultural interaction, was associated with higher cultural creativity through greater inclusion of foreign ideas. Multiculturalism showed no significant effects on creative problem solving, while color blindness actually decreased the number of outside ideas and thereby reduced cultural creativity. So obviously that feedback from the social scientific world is very telling, and shows incredible promise for embracing a polycultural worldview in terms of our own individual well-being, our own creativity, our own ability to problem solve, as well as living amongst others with, who are not just different from us, but with whom we might disagree on sort of major issues, but how we might live more peacefully with them and humanely, and recognize the humanity in each other. So on that note, Jamil, if you don't have anything you want to add before we jump into the questions?
I think I'm good. This is
okay, great. So we'd love to share a few questions now to sort of help us formalize and really we're a believer in discussing the ideas and giving ourselves opportunities to think these things through verbally, which of course means we are going to be thinking out loud. And so we invite you to engage with grace and vulnerability and compassion as we kind of explore these ideas. We're not expecting sort of polished answers by any means. So the first question we wanted to present to you all was religious identities and cultures have historically been points of extreme polarization and explicit division within societies. We see examples of that to this day. How might polyculturalism speak to the human relationship or relationships between faith and theology? And we can give folks a couple minutes to reflect, and then we invite you all to just unmute yourself and share whatever thoughts you'd like to share.
Can you repeat the question again, Tasneem?
Yes, absolutely. Religious identities and cultures have historically been points of extreme polarization and explicit division within societies. How might polyculturalism speak to the human relationship to faith and theology? So in other words, how might polyculturalism be a tool to reduce conflicts that are potentially created through religious difference?
May I ask a question first before responding to that?
Absolutely.
Yes, the studies that you just mentioned where they identified the differences in terms of the consequences of multiculturalism, polyculturalism, and color blindness. What was the why for those differences?
In terms of,
because
sorry,
that wasn't revealed. I mean, you identified the differences, but why? I mean, what would the findings determine as the reason for those differences?
Yeah, so in summary, and this is a very in a nutshell summary, it's essentially that color blindness and multiculturalism were inviting more divisiveness between self and other rather than opening up self and other and what one thought of as one's own ideas and quote unquote the other's ideas. So in general, when they were priming participants with both colorblindness and multiculturalism, and they have the operational definitions of those theories within their papers. It led to more constricture of mental engagement rather than openness.
I just want to
the why still doesn't answer the why of that to me. Why?
If I can just add to Tasneem's point, and I think this is responding, is that polyculturalism asks us to really own our own rootedness in our respective cultural identities. And, for that to be the place from which we can then engage with other cultures, other experiences, the openness that Tasneem just referred to. And I think that color blindness and multiculturalism often ask us to, on some level, erase that which is very specific to ourselves and to our own experience, even though multiculturalism is positing the claim that it is about space for representation. It is about space for, it is still looking at a landscape that is somehow blurring a lot of specificity and uniqueness that I think, and that can be disputed, but that I think puts us at a disadvantage when we are engaging across lines, barriers of cultural difference, etc. I hope what I just said made some sense.
Well, just
Yeah.
let me respond in terms of one thing. In terms of your question about the faith and theology, I think regardless of the uh, the characterization of the interplay between cultures, to me, what makes a difference in terms of faith and theology, or just in terms of cultural engagement, has to do with whether people are actually engaged on a practical level with one another. That is not an abstraction.
Yeah, yes, I would absolutely agree. And to backtrack just a bit in terms of your why question, the the why may not be answered yet, to be frank, because there have not been enough studies done, which is one reason why I was emphasizing the sort of, despite it having promising results, it is a relatively new concept in the social sciences. And so what they found was these were basically sort of it's not causation, it's correlation that they found. And so that why is still open to be explored and to be engaged with, really. And it likely has to do with a mix of sort of self-conceptualization psychology and cultural psychology in terms of how the self is envisioned within any particular culture. Um, Going back to, yeah, your really interesting comment about making sure that we're engaging first. Can you say more about what you mean by that? Engaging first on a human level and then moving to theology or faith?
You're asking me that?
Yeah, yeah. Could you, if you don't mind?
Oh, well, I'm thinking that from my experience, the people don't know each other. I mean, people are in many ways separated from really practical human engagement. And these ideas, these stereotypes, these notions that people have about other cultures and each other arise out of ideas that are perpetuated by those who want to promote divisions and misunderstanding for various reasons. So out of my experience, just like if the situation at CTS, if it's an intentional, conscious effort to bring together different people from different cultures and faith traditions and historical experiences. And to me, that is something that actually gave rise to trying to figure out how to define the interaction between peoples across borders, artificial borders. And which, this came about out of really concrete community struggles and efforts to transform different structures of racism and oppression that actually were put in place to divide people from one another. So people began to, in many ways, see the collective interest in forming coalitions and engagements that would help transform some of the oppressive social structures. So I'm saying, in also, if you look at religious traditions, most many of them also operate in isolation and not in cross faith engagements. That's simply put, as I can put it right now.
Yeah, yes, thank you so much. That and I see Dr. Ringer has a question, so I'll turn it over to you in a moment. But that was, I think that's exactly the spirit of the question we're asking. And Jamil, please jump in terms of religious identity and faith schemas are so critical and important to so many of us. But unfortunately, so often they are kind of there isn't too much interreligious work. going on, CTS aside, of course, but in terms of most folks might think of their religious faith traditions as very particular, right? And I want to take us back to Prashad's phrase of the myth of cultural purity. And so oftentimes what can happen within, you know, for various reasons that we don't have time to get into right now. But what can happen within sort of religious communities is this sense that the faith that we hold has been unaffected, right, throughout time. And certainly we're not here to argue whether that's theologically accurate or not, but more in terms of how we as human beings, as people who are living in this particular moment in time, how do we enact our faith? How do we embody it? I'll give an example of my own in terms of so I pray 5 times a day, like many Muslims across the world. But oftentimes I'm not at home when the time to pray comes. And so I keep looking over here because my phone is over here. And so I use the technology from my cell phone to help me find the Qibla, or the direction that I need to pray in. And I don't know how many minds and cultures have gone into developing that technology that I use to you know, do my almost quotidian, sometimes admittedly mundane ritual of praying. But that's become part of my daily life. And so just reminding myself that other people have contributed to my own practice of faith in that way, for myself, immediately makes me sort of more open to engaging with ideas, and reminds me that I'm not living in a vacuum, that even though my faith is my own, I am affected by various other cultural sources and technologies and all of that. Jamil, I wanted to make sure that, did you have anything to add before we turn to Dr. Ringer?
Yeah, just real quick, I wanted to share, I mean, that can be inherited within a single family. I was raised in the Orthodox Church, and I inherited Orthodoxy, if you will, from my father. And on my mom's side, her mother was Roman Catholic, and her Polish mother was Roman Catholic, and her Slovak father was Lutheran. And so the 3 branches of Christianity found themselves in an immediate, you know, nuclear family somehow. And that kind of intra-Christian conversation, dialogue, was always somehow present. And I like to think of that as a sort of polycultural phenomena, in that we were very open to this kind of intra-religious exchange. Great. And if we would like to go to Dr. Ringer.
I don't know you put
question.
the chat, but maybe you wanted
I
to
just put a
share about
comment
that.
in the chat. So I think Nora has her hand up. You can go to her.
Do you want to say anything more about that, Dr. Ringer, about what you said in the chat?
No, just what I said in the comment. I just, as I'm listening to the conversation, that polyculturalism could be a way forward between some of the kind of pejorative ways and kind of pathologies, if you will, of colorblindness and multiculturalism.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also invites, whereas color blindness sort of erases all difference, right? And it pretends there is no difference. And multiculturalism acknowledges difference, but says everybody has to kind of stay in their own little bubble and you know, pretend that there is no sort of outside systemic dynamic happening. Polyculturalism is about honoring and recognizing differences, and starting the conversations on points of overlap rather than points of difference. And so what the intent behind that is that it helps soften us as we enter into conversations. And it does not mean, it's not a call for sort of kumbaya, let's all agree on a single idea. Obviously, that's never going to happen. We're humans, we're unique, we're individuals, and so polyculturalism is an absolute celebration of different cultures, while acknowledging that all of these different cultures have developed in conversation with each other.
Your colleague, Dr. Morales, does such wonderful work around religious porosity and how and the cultural components of religion, belief, practice, tradition, ritual, so forth. And I think that that's also a very polycultural idea that, cultures do not have these defined boundaries and these kind of barriers, that there's always some ebb and flow and interchange occurring.
I believe Nora had a question.
Yeah, I actually came a little bit late, but what I got from the talk about polyculturalism as opposed to the other two theories proposed was this idea of rootedness. And Tasneem, you asked the question about how can
I'm so sorry. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. I'm having a really hard time hearing you. I don't know if I'm the only one.
Is this any better?
Oh, yes, much
Yes.
better.
Interesting. Yeah, so you asked the question about how can polyculturalism, as opposed to the other two theories you presented, perhaps be help with like religious conflict and throughout history. And I was thinking about the term or the idea of rootedness. You talked to us about how polyculturalism helps people to feel more rooted. And I'm thinking about this idea of truth. Like every religious tradition wants to have, many religious traditions want to have a homogeneity on what truth is, right? And I mean, I'm thinking about the highly, I mean, for Christians, I mean, to accept Jesus, for example, and I don't mean to generalize. I did study at CTS, so, but every religious community has this desire to have sometimes a monopoly on truth. And I'm wondering if perhaps that this approach can help people feel like you can still have your truth, but not feel threatened by it. I don't know. I'm just putting that out there because if you feel rooted and content and you're in this idea that, and I don't want to say it's perennialism because perennialism is a little bit different, but I've just been reflecting on this idea of like one's rootedness and groundedness and then recognizing other people's truths. So just a thought out there.
Yeah, Jamil, would you like to respond to that?
Well, I think that's absolutely the case. And, once again, we have this model called ROCO, which is essentially rootedness, openness, connectivity, opportunity, that there is this polycultural life practice, this journey. And really the ability to accept someone else's truth as their truth and as valid and beautiful and powerful and meaningful, while acknowledging and very much embracing and holding true your own tradition, your own faith, beliefs, that those two things are not at all mutually exclusive, that they are part of an ongoing process. And we believe that makes for a much more healthier set of dynamics within and between communities.
Yeah, and if I can just follow up to that, Noura, thank you for your comment so much. I agree. I agree with what you propose, and I absolutely think not even just religious communities, many communities and institutions often enter into conflict over domination, over whatever the idea of truth might be, whatever the idea of power might be. But what polyculturalism, the way I envision it, I'm an artist, and so oftentimes I will give visual metaphors. Perhaps that is helpful to some of you. But the way I envision it, and in this case, Noura, to use your example, I imagine truth as this multifaceted gemstone that's sort of floating in the center of all of us, right? Like it's floating in the center of all theologies or all people who are working towards finding meaning and purpose in life. But we're all positioned differently around it, right? So the angle one person might be seeing is still just as true as an angle another person might be seeing, right? But without polyculturalism, we may not be able to recognize that. We may not be able to see the connectedness between our truths. The hope is that polyculturalism helps us understand the surfaces that connect the two truths, or even that perhaps are shared, or where the truths align. And so it recognizes and validates and honors the angle at which you're approaching the truth, while also making space for the truth of other people. Okay, wonderful. So I know we're nearing the end of our hour, and Jose is here, I think. So, Jamil, if it's okay with you, maybe Jose, you can say a few words. I'm trying to, there you are. I don't know, Jose, if you can tune in or not right now, or unmute yourself.
Yeah, if you hear white noise in the background, it's because I'm holding a baby, but I don't know if I have much more to add, just to say that, as I put in the chat, a lot of the work that I do almost assumes this polyculturality as like ground floor. And what I have discovered is that it gives both the opportunity for individual person to claim their rootedness in a particular tradition, and at the same time remain radically open to the other. And I think that that's, in my opinion, the best way forward, because it doesn't sacrifice either of those supposed kind of contradictions, which I don't think they're contradictions. I actually think they're embedded in each other. This radical openness and this inescapable particularity. And so, but I don't have much more to add. I think Dr. Tasneem did a good job with the parts that I was able to tune in for. But that's all I have.
Great, thank you so much, Jose. Jamil, I'll turn it over to you to close out before we turn it over to Kim to do the final closeout.
Well, I just want to thank all of you so much for your insights and input and participation. I think there are so many arenas in our daily lives where we can apply a polycultural lens, and that is really our hope with the work that we are doing, the ideas that we are generating around how to really challenge the alienation that exists within so much of American culture today, the polarization, the fact that people are not necessarily speaking to each other across lines of perceived and real differences, and that this kind of tribalism that has become so pronounced and so harmful in our political lives, social lives, so forth, is something that we believe polyculturalism can help diffuse. So we hope to remain very much engaged with the CTS community moving forward. And this has been an honor and a pleasure. And I'd like to hand the screen to Kim Schultz.
Thank you both so much for this really powerful opportunity to learn and to explore. And I think that you're right in terms of that interreligious document as well that we share with internal and external speakers, and hopefully folks here have seen it when you come in as a student or staff member. But it is speaking about rootedness and speaking from where you come from, not making outside assumptions outside of that. And the opportunity for radical growth, I think, is also very useful for us to think about as well. So thank you for that. In just closing, I want to open it up to see if there are any announcements that folks would like to share. I'm going to be rude and make the first one, and that is that our 7 Neighbors podcast season 4 has dropped today, episode 1, featuring Dr. Jose Morales, who is on our call today. And it is the season is called Diversifying the Narrative, Immigration and Religion in America. And we encourage you to please check it out. Episode 1. Thank you already. Really enjoyed that. Oh, I got excited. It was a podcast. They enjoyed this Wednesday gathering. Good. I got too excited. The link is there. It's our7neighbors.com, everywhere you find your podcast. So please go ahead and check that out and listen to Jose interview and be in discussion with really interesting folks on the subject of immigration and religion. Jose, do you want to say anything, Dr. Morales, in brief about it? I know you still
just, please subscribe, tune in. It's a great season.
Great. Are there any other announcements of good for the group?
Could I make
Right.
one quick comment?
Yeah.
And Dr. Ringer, you can back me up on this, I think. But I'm thinking about resources for this way of making a case for rootedness and interconnectedness. And I think Howard Thurman probably is a good person for that, and looking at the particular and the universal. He has a saying that that we're all connected, and he also couples that with the saying that I go down in me and come up in you.
Thank you. Thank you again, Jamil and Tasneem. We're very grateful. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.